Yeah, let's go again. Making these video essays is hard. Have we got anything easier to talk about?
I mean, we could talk about how capitalism is the greatest evil of human history and how communism is the way forward.
I mean, that's an oversimplification, and how is that an easy thing to talk about? Also, why aren't you doing the accent?
We discussed it, don't you remember? We're waiting until after we show
Yeah, I remember. You can shut up now.
How about a video about how the woke council mob are destroying Western civilization? Also, you have a stupid face.
We share the same face.
Ha! So you admit it then? The woke mob are destroying civilization.
That doesn't... How on earth... Go to your room.
I'm in my room.
Then close the door and stay there. And stop being such a troll. Trying to trigger leftists doesn't make you cool.
Oh my god, just get out of my life.
If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even have a life. Oh, right. I don't know. Is there another idiot out there we can debunk? Ooh, here we fucking go. Being on the internet for a prolonged period of time can be a troublesome endeavour for the politically active. I'm not here to make any inherently partisan statements today, but I am going to say that misinformation is everywhere, and the amount of people that spread the misinformation seems to just continue to multiply infinitely.
There's too many of them!
So today, my information blasting blaster of information lasers is pointed at rapper and human with opinion, Zuby.
Don't forget it! Turn on the lasers! Yeah!
Ignorance. Our story today begins in 2019, where Zuby, in what one can only assume to be a big-brained rational frenzy, posted a video of himself defeating the British women's deadlifting record, claiming to identify as a woman as he did it. This move, of course, completely owned the libs and proved once and for all that biological women aren't as strong as biological men, because that's a thing that needed to be refuted. I'm going to get this out of the way now, because I'm sure some of you have probably picked up on it, and dishonestly or otherwise, maybe wanting to comment about it. I won't be using she/her pronouns for Zuby today. He makes it plainly obvious that he's acting in bad faith, and I wouldn't dream of insulting the trans community by playing along with his horse shit like that. Transphobic stunts are nothing new. What makes this particular example so potent is the media notoriety Zuby would go on to achieve. A cursory googling of Zuby's stunt shows us videos by The Sun, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, The Daily Mail. The Rightosphere loved him.
I bet you hated that, didn't you, Lefty? Are you triggered, Lefty? Huh? Are you triggered?
Room, now.
Stop silencing free speech. This is the marketplace of ideas. You just can't handle when someone has a different opinion to you.
You can come out when you have something constructive to say.
Nerd.
What's his problem? Man, I don't know. Something about white privilege he can't see in Sargon. Anyway, Sky News also jumped all over Zuby's stunt in a particularly one-sided and cynical interview where Sky News, a news channel, brought on, uncontested, a man whose opinion is backed up by no academic credentials related to the field of transathleticism and transgender identity. And they're able to discursively peddle these opinions as fact because, you know, it's the news. It's just reporting facts, man. Nothing partisan going on here. Just facts, bro. Which is why this interview is so dangerous. The resultant YouTube video confirms this problem. It's filled with misrepresentations, straw man arguments, and downright falsehoods. But the response Zuby's received for his stunt is overwhelmingly positive, because society as a whole just hasn't quite gotten its head around trans identity, and in particular transathleticism yet. I can't imagine why. But that's the goal of today's video, to go through Zuby's opinions about transathleticism and why they're wrong, not to mention why his deadlifting stunt was not only not a valid demonstration of his opinion, but downright transphobic. So strap yourselves in, because it's time for laser. Something's missing. Yeah, usually in my debunks I like to have a little laugh at the idiot to lighten the mood and preface the theory, but I don't know, this time it just doesn't seem like there's that much to go on. Shall we get started?
I gave you 12 rules for life and kept my room clean. I'm the Jordan Peterson of rap.
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
Hope you don't mind me making this a bit more comfortable to film. Is this too provocative? If it is, it's what you're getting. Sue me. So let's break down what Zuby did. He deadlifted above the female British record and identified as a woman as he did it. And his reasoning is because he feels that trans women shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports, and thought he was demonstrating why. So firstly, this isn't something unique to Zuby. As far as this faction of the discourse goes, appropriating a trans identity to make an argument of reductio ad absurdum, pause the screen if you need it, borders on transphobic cliché. It's the same type of thing that Piers Morgan does with his two-spirit penguin bullshit. The OG attack helicopter meme does something similar, and wasn't there something else like this I saw recently?
I'll tell you that. Anyway, this week I changed my gender and went to Planet Fitness.
Seriously, what is it about transphobic men cosplaying as trans women to prove trans women don't exist? So, I'm sure I don't need to comment too much about Crowder. The reason Zuby's stunt holds no water is because his reductio ad absurdum conclusion that he's portraying, it just isn't happening. There are no demonstrable examples of men assuming a female identity just before they lift the weight to win at sports. Which means that his argument isn't coming from a place of precedent or statistics, but from a place of misunderstanding. And the key misunderstanding, which Zuby gives multiple examples of during this interview, is the failure to observe the science behind trans identity.
Biological men and biological women are different. That shouldn't be a controversial statement in any sort of sane world.
I won't be able to do this topic much justice in the short time of this video, but the thing that most transphobic arguments I've seen seem to misunderstand or ignore is the discrepancy between sex and gender. Sex is biological, the chromosomes, the reproductive organs, and gender is a social category. They're not the same thing, they don't behave in the same way, and I don't care how much you plead, argue, or fucking cry, facts don't care about your feelings, and the scientific facts state that sex and gender are different fucking things. So, coming back to Zuby's statement about biological men being different to biological women, and how that shouldn't be a controversial statement, it isn't. At least not in the way he's implying anyway. Transgender YouTuber Natalie Wynn points out beautifully in her video about pronouns.
We all agree on the biology.
Which is true, because no one in the trans community is under any illusion about their biology. If anything, they're painfully aware of it and tend to seek medical intervention to distance themselves from it. So, Zuby's comment is either a complete straw man argument or a tacit admission that he doesn't understand the science. The only reason the statement will ever be controversial is that this is the same language used by out-and-out transphobes to demean and belittle transgender identity. Speaking of which, identify as has got to be one of the most misrepresented phrases of our time. When trans people identify as a gender that doesn't coalesce with their birth sex, it's the culmination of oftentimes multiple years of painstaking consideration, trials, experimentation, and an eventual conclusion that they'd be happier living as their correct gender. It's literally an integral facet of who they are, and it is not something you can just slap on whenever you feel like making a political point. Zuby identifying as a woman whilst deadlifting is just not how identity works. It isn't a conscious decision that you suddenly make, and it isn't some temporary affect you can just put on. Your identity, it's a rushing river. It's going to flow its direction whether you like it or not, and the only decision you get to make is whether you fight it and risk exhausting yourself and drowning in its depths, or if you relax and let it peacefully guide you down its course. Zuby's got this one wrong, and I'm inclined to believe it was more out of ignorance than dishonesty, but still, it'd be great, Zuby, if you could just not. And I say ignorance because later in the interview he does say this.
In a certain way in terms of gender pronouns. We're going back to the Jordan.
Okay, yeah, sure. In terms of just politeness and being kind to people and not going out of my way to offend people, just like I generally don't, I don't want to, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, I try to treat every human being that I speak to with respect, and I was raised to treat people as I wish to be treated.
Which tells me what we're dealing with here is the implicit transphobia that Talia Betcher describes in her lecture Brain Sex. It's preferable to out-and-out hostility, but this subtle attitude of I'll be polite without really believing you're the gender you say you are fuels the Jordan Peterson free speech shit that gets used as a justification to deny trans people the legal right to self-actualize without fear of derogation. Which is also something Zuby alludes to in this interview. If you're interested in learning more about this concept, then I recommend watching Abigail Thorne's video on transphobia, but we're pressed for time here, so let's crack on. I've explained Zuby's misunderstanding of trans identity, but I know the reason you're really here is for a discussion of transathleticism, a word I'll be using to describe the presence of trans people in sports. Okay, you're on board with the identity part. Zuby fucked it up, misrepresented it, whatever, but his point about trans women in sports is still valid, right? Well, no. There's a lot of nuance to this discussion that I sadly will also not be giving the detail it deserves today, but rest assured, I will be doing the legwork necessary to prove that Zuby's little stunt and his supporting justification are callous, basic, deceptive, and wrong. It's again not a new thing, people being sceptical of the inclusion of trans women in sports. Zuby's take is paper thin though. For starters, his stunt is completely irrelevant because in the current state of affairs, sporting bodies such as the IOC and the IAAF legislate that a transgender athlete must have been undergoing consistent HRT for 1 year before they're eligible to compete. So Zuby's record would not stand nor be recognised by any serious governing body. And he actually seems to be somewhat aware of this.
Even if I went on a hormonal treatment for 1 year, I think, to bring my testosterone down to a certain level, and then I went and I did actually enter a female powerlifting competition next year, or say Anthony Joshua in boxing transitioned to a woman and next year was boxing against biological women, I think you'd have to be either stupid or, you know, ideologically possessed to think that that would be remotely fair, because it's not. There is a strength advantage, there's a speed advantage, there's a body size difference, and we're all aware of this.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and to do so, I'll introduce you to the works of Joanna Harper, a trans woman who is not only an athlete, but also a scientist who has been studying the effects of HRT on the athletic performance of transgender athletes for years now, and was influential in the decision behind the 1 year eligibility model. As studies have consistently shown that after 9 to 12 months on HRT, a trans athlete can expect to see a 10 to 12% change in their athletic performance levels, which, interestingly enough, is the disparity of performance levels between cis male and cis female athletes at the elite level. Coincidence? This is due to the biological process HRT instigates. Athletically speaking, the introduction of increased or decreased testosterone levels alters the muscular potential of the body. In trans males, the muscle mass and aerobic potential will increase with the testosterone content, whereas with trans females, it will decrease as the testosterone lowers. So when Zuby says there's a strength and speed advantage, I won't beat about the bush, he's full of shit. Now, it'd be dishonest of me to ignore the nuance here, and I want to make it completely clear that we're dealing with the facts. It'd be easy for me to just hand wave and say, yep, it's all about the performance levels, trans athletes are fine, case closed. But it isn't that simple. Harper's studies sadly only truly maintain their validity in sports where the results are metrically comparable, sports that are referred to as CGS sports, where the results are measured in centimetres, grams or seconds. Sports where the results are measured in other ways, however, such as in combat, where you might measure hits landed, or ball sports, where you'd use goals, there are places where Harper stipulates that trans athletes, specifically trans women, would harbour advantages and disadvantages. And a perfect case study for this concept is Tiffany Abreu. Abreu is a trans female volleyball player whom Joanna Harper observes in her book Sporting Gender. Harper describes Abreu as a player with a devastating spike, a move where the volleyball is smashed downwards to score a point, which highlights that Abreu hits hard. But then she goes on to say,
she is also not very quick and is something of a defensive liability. Both her strengths and weaknesses as a volleyball player are influenced by her nature as a transgender player.
And for those of you wondering, no, she didn't dominate. Her team wasn't overtly successful, and she didn't dominate the individual standings in the way Lionel Messi or LeBron James have for their sports. So it's clear that trans women do harbour some advantages, and that Zuby bringing up if Anthony Joshua transitioned does hold the slightest air of merit. A taller, broader, formerly masculine frame will, by definition, hit harder due to the physics of momentum and force. But he conveniently seems to forget that disciplines like boxing are categorized by weight for this specific reason, and that any advantage Joshua would gain in this imaginary scenario would be neutralized due to the nature of the sport. You see, Zuby's trying to conjure this image of a gargantuan trans woman beating the crap out of a 5-foot-tall skinny bio girl, which would definitively never happen regardless of whether the colossus was trans or cis. So, again, Zuby's full of shit. Now, about Zuby's powerlifting remark, I could point out that after a year on HRT, he would see his performance levels drop to an acceptable female standard. However, in this case, it's simpler to look to precedent, and so it's time to talk about Laurel Hubbard. Hubbard is a trans female weightlifter who you've probably heard of, since the world lost its collective shit when it found out she'd be competing in the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo. And after all the noise about how she was destined to dominate the event, ripping the rights away from women and making a mockery of sport altogether, she spectacularly came last in the over 87 kilograms heavyweight category. Can we all just gather in a moment of silence for all the transphobes left despondent as their surefire ideological trump card turned to ash before their very eyes? Fuck, I don't have my keyboard, I need to press F. Genuinely, I hate to be this way about the issue, but I've been involved in political discourse for a while now, and I have never seen a position so bereft of any factual basis or evidence as this one, and all in the name of denying a marginalised community even more rights than are already being withheld. It's true, despite HRT bringing trans female athletes to an acceptably competitive level, that they will retain small advantages, and disadvantages, I'd like to add. But why are you only concerned with what's fair when it comes to a trans athlete? You're celebrating the natural advantages of fastest man alive Usain Bolt and the dominance of Michael Phelps. Were they fair? So whilst you're getting behind the tallest basketball players, staring in awe at hypermobile gymnasts and counting your winnings thanks to the smallest jockey, if you applaud their natural advantages and don't extend that celebration to a trans athlete, pardon me for interpreting that as nothing more than cold, naked, unrestrained transphobia. So it's clear that Zuby has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. That's obvious, but I've explained why he's wrong. This is his chance to learn and not be an idiot again. What's more interesting, however, is why Sky News, one of our most prevalent news stations here in the UK, decided to platform this moron when, if they wanted to partake in objective discourse around this subject, they could have interviewed, an actual expert.
And the truth is, the answer to this riddle is rooted in what Sky News is doing with this interview. It would be silly to conclude that they were looking for objective truth when that plainly isn't what they were going for. Look at the framing of the interview. Zuby's completely alone, with no pushback or counter-narrative to anything he's saying. They aren't interested in seeing if Zuby's ideas stand up to scrutiny. They already know what it is they want to hear from him and are interested in him saying it in the shortest time with the fewest number of pushbacks possible. It's basically propaganda with brunch.
You may think I'm jumping to conclusions here, but it's quite obvious that there's a particular agenda underpinning the discussion here. I've just pretty easily debunked everything Zuby said about trans people, so it's quite clear that the truth wasn't on the menu in this interview, since the lucrative Sky News, you'd think, would have had the resources to check before they platformed all of these falsehoods.
And there's of course the bit I didn't show you where they discordantly veer off into talking about reparations and how hang on a minute, what the fuck does this have to do with trans people?
I'm not going to say it, but I invite you to draw the one and only conclusion you could when, not known for his qualifications in American racial history because he doesn't have any, Zuby, whose claim to fame that put him there is a video of him belittling transathleticism online, is asked a question about reparations. If you can't see that this is a cynical attempt by Sky News to downplay the impact of racism towards black Americans throughout history, well, Hilariously, Zuby already said this bit earlier in the video.
I think you'd have to be either stupid or, ideologically possessed.
You see, the danger with all of this is the discursive framing of the whole thing. Sky News is touted to be a news station, and those are generally associated with objective truth, reporting things that have happened, speaking only of factual events, and not typically involving any opinions or ideology. Because of this framing, it's easy to interpret everything said here as objective truth, because why would a news channel publish such falsehoods? And since it's honestly what a lot of people currently think anyway, it creates this vicious cycle of enforcing the status quo, because when you see an opinion of yours spoken by someone else, especially in this context, it can be quite easy to presume it to be true, emboldening you to parrot it as fact and dissuading you from actually checking, since you now have no apparent reason to.
It's why video essayists link our sources in the description, because we don't want you to do this. We'd rather you know that we're not just spouting uninformed opinion, and want you to go and learn about the topic further. I wonder how many sources Zuby and Sky News have in their description. So basically, don't just listen to other people's opinions when deciding your own. Look at the studies, read the accompanying notes. Try to look at things with a clean mind and not look for the specific things that prove what you already reckon to be true right, rather the general trend of information around the subject.
As for Zuby, well, it's difficult to know what to do with him. I don't think he's any more harmful than your average transphobe. He just found a niche in the market and ran with it. No doubt his rap career saw an upwards lift after all the publicity he received, and I'm not inherently against success. In fact, as a fellow musician, I'm happy that Zuby seems to be succeeding in such a barren industry, but it's a shame and a bit sad that he decided to punch down like he did.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is, to Zuby, to everyone, stop being transphobic. Trans people are getting attacked from every angle right now, and shit like this is just not necessary. So, stop it. Hi, I realise I've seriously lacked in videos like this over the past year. I'm not happy with that. I want this to be my main source of content, so if you're new here and a little bit put off by all of the video game stuff and guitar covers, don't worry, I'm going to be seriously cutting back on that in the new year. One might say there's going to be some changes around here. So if you liked this video, please do click subscribe, give me a like, comment if you think I missed anything, or if there's anything you're interested in learning more about, and other than that, I guess I'll see you all some other time. Take care.